Good evening, I'm Klaudia Czerwińska and you're watching World News Tonight live from Warsaw. Could Russia attack Europe in 2027? The NATO general who says so met with top Polish officials today, with security top of their agenda. The meeting took place against the backdrop of a brand new military deal signed between Warsaw and Washington. More on that in just a moment, but first, tonight's headlines. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy backtracks on changes to anti-corruption bodies. France to recognize the Palestinian state. And U.S. President Donald Trump says there's a 50-50 chance of no trade deal with the EU. According to Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, the commander-in-chief of NATO's European forces, General Alexus Grynkewich, confirmed that 2027 is the year when Russia could attack Europe. The talks between the U.S. general and high-profile Polish officials follow a fresh U.S. Poland $4 billion military deal. Could this stark warning and more money flowing into the Polish defense sector signal the imminent danger? Our chief political correspondent, Aaron Demmin, has this report.
A grip and grin in the heart of Warsaw for Prime Minister Donald Tusk and NATO's supreme commander in Europe. Alexus Grynkewich touching down in the Polish capital to talk about this headline in the German daily Bild. A blunt warning Grynkewich issued at a conference last week that Russia and China could mount an invasion of Europe and Taiwan respectively in 2027.
That's just 2 years away when we think that he could be ready to make his move, and that phone call to Putin might come. So the time is of the essence.
The mooted timeline sent ripples across the region, with senior Polish officials confirming the country is taking the scenario seriously. In a statement issued on Friday night, Prime Minister Tusk says the pair reaffirmed the strong Polish-American alliance and close intelligence cooperation. Grynkewich was only appointed 3 weeks ago.
Pursuant to the authority invested in him by the North Atlantic Council, General Alexus Grynkewich.
With NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte laying out his expectations of the four-star general.
The calling and duty of this post is to protect 1 billion people across our alliance. That responsibility is the true burden of the Supreme Allied Commander Europe.
During his time in Poland, Grynkewich also met with Foreign Minister and newly appointed Deputy Prime Minister Radosław Sikorski, astronaut Sławosz Uznański-Wiśniewski, and Defense Minister Władysław Koźniak-Kamysz. In fact, it was a busy few hours for Koźniak-Kamysz, who earlier signed off on a $4 billion loan deal with Washington to modernize the Polish armed forces.
Apache helicopters are already in Poland. Polish pilots are flying F-35 aircraft manufactured in the United States, and Patriot batteries and air defense systems are being produced for us.
We are enabling key allies like Poland to access the most advanced American-made defense systems. In doing so, we are also strengthening our own national security.
Over the last 3 years, America has delivered more than $11 billion in loans or loan guarantees for weaponry.
Poland needs this kind of loan from the United States. It's a secure loan, and it shows something more about the relationship.
At the same time, Warsaw has recommitted to its pledge to lock in defence spending at 5% of GDP next year, and with NATO's top brass sending sombre signals over a potential Russian attack, that defence cash could prove more important than ever. Aaron Darman, TVP World.
Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelenskyy is walking back on his controversial decision to sign into law the bill curbing the independence of anti-corruption bodies. Zelenskyy's solution to the whirlwind situation is a new emergency law restoring the independence of two key anti-corruption agencies. But is this going to be enough to reverse the damage that has been already done? Sonia Gatabiszczan went out looking for an answer to this question.
Widespread protests across Ukraine, coupled with concern from Western partners, triggered a reaction. On Thursday, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy introduced a new emergency law, restoring the independence of two key anti-corruption agencies, just days after his move to curb it.
It looks now, I would say, like a public relations disaster for Zelenskyy. especially against the background that now apparently in this new draft bill that Zelenskyy has proposed, basically the previous steps would be reversed.
The controversial law passed on Tuesday, according to Zelenskyy, intended to counter Russian influence by giving Ukraine's chief prosecutor oversight of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine and the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office. But limiting the independence of key agencies left many concerned, including the EU Commissioner for Enlargement, Marta Kos.
I'm concerned because fighting corruption is one of the basics on the way to become an EU member. And it is a precondition that the state is having independent anti-corruption agencies.
Added obstacles to Ukraine's EU accession, coupled with the public outcry, had the MPs reflect on their Tuesday vote. Some who voted for it realized the law's shortcomings in the aftermath.
The version of the draft law that was put to the vote caused concern, not only among society, but also among international partners. And this is a signal that can't be ignored.
In the end of the day, you can even see this whole episode as a sort of documentation or manifestation of Ukrainian democracy, because we had these protests and we have now the reaction from the president, who has introduced a new bill. In a way, that is how democracy works, and it even works in Ukraine during as existential a war as Ukraine is currently fighting against Russia.
Legislators are expected to vote on Zelenskyy's new bill on July 31st. For TVP World, I'm Sonia Gatabishchan.
After months of high-stakes negotiations and tit-for-tat tariff threats, the European Union and the U.S. could reach the beginnings of a trade deal by this weekend. EU officials and diplomats say the agreement could most likely compromise a 15% baseline tariff on most European goods. But U.S. President Donald Trump believes otherwise, saying there's a 50-50 chance of absolutely no deal. More from our EU correspondent Alexus Grynkewich in Brussels.
While there are whispers in the Belgian capital that the beginnings of a potential trade deal between the US and the European Union could be signed, sealed and delivered by the weekend, the 47th President of the United States, Donald Trump, seems to be less than optimistic. Now, while on a trip to Scotland, he essentially doused the hopes that we're hearing in the Belgian capital that the beginnings of that framework could be hammered out and agreed upon by the weekend. He told the press pack there in Scotland that Brussels, to him, seems to be desperate.
I would say that we have a 50-50 chance, maybe less than that, but a 50-50 chance of making a deal with the EU.
Now, sources in the Belgian capital are stating that they're hearing that that framework agreement could be reached by the weekend. Now, this would end months of trade uncertainty, sending stock markets, producers, businesses and consumers into a tailspin over what we've heard have only been threats coming out of Washington ever since US President Donald Trump took office on the 20th of January, ever since he announced his new trade policies on Liberation Day. Since then, we have seen the European Commissioner for Trade, Maroš Šefčovič, travelling back and forth between Brussels and the Oval Office, trying to find the best deal for European businesses. What we do know that if this deal is not brokered, most EU goods will be slapped with a 30% import levy when they go into the United States market. This spells trouble for that €9.3 trillion trade relationship between the transatlantic titans. We're also hearing rumours that the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, may travel to Scotland herself to hopefully get a deal done for the bloc. Alexus Grynkewich from Brussels for TVP World.
France, Germany and the United Kingdom have called for an immediate end to what they described as a humanitarian catastrophe. The country's leaders are ramping up pressure on Israel following reports of widespread famine in Gaza. Our correspondent Alex Cadier has been tracking the shift in European attitudes towards Israel from Brussels and has this report.
Well, that declaration of recognition of the Palestinian state from the French president makes it the first country in the G7 and the first Western European power to do so. It is a landmark change in the diplomatic and international position of the French government, and it comes, of course, with the growing starvation in Gaza, the growing violence against civilian populations reported by the United Nations and others. Clearly, those governments feeling like they need to put more pressure on Israel. We've seen a statement from a joint statement from France, the UK and Germany addressing exactly this, saying that the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza has to end immediately. That was the message from those three countries, and that saying that withholding essential humanitarian assistance to civilian populations is just unacceptable. That recognition of the Palestinian state by France, part of a growing chorus of European pressure. But let's have a look at where those European countries stand, looking at who recognizes the Palestinian state. Now, you'll see now, France, of course, is about to change its position. We have seen the UK, Germany do not. Interestingly, most Central and Eastern European countries, Poland included, do recognize a Palestinian state. They have done so since 1988. And now looking up to the Baltic states as well, you can see no recognition there. We have seen this from the beginning of the war in Gaza, certainly since October 7th and the atrocities committed there. Europe is divided on this issue. Nevertheless, France moving forward. We heard from Amélie Ferré, who's from the French Institute for International Relations Security Studies Center, about why the French were doing this. Now, here's what she had to say.
So it's quite clever of the president to say, I'm not going to recognize the state of Palestine at the conference in New York, but at the United Nations, because that gives him about 2 months to try to join other Western powers, notably the United Kingdom and Canada, to make a slightly more general, slightly more global announcement than just France.
So there's a desire from France here to bring other nations, bring the UK and Canada perhaps on board to recognizing that Palestinian statehood, giving them some time between now and the UN General Assembly in September to perhaps shift their positions. What is clear, despite the criticism from Israel of this move, Benjamin Netanyahu saying a Palestinian state would create a platform for the annihilation of Israel, Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, criticizing France, Donald Trump saying the good news is that what Emmanuel Macron says doesn't matter. Nevertheless, this French move designed to bring more European powers on board and put more pressure on Israel to end the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza. In Brussels, I'm Alex Grynkewich for TVP World.
U.S. tech giant Intel announced it's canceling plans to build a semiconductor factory near the southwestern Polish city of Wrocław as part of its global reduction in force. Internationally, Intel expects to cut 22% of its workforce this year. The 2,000 new Intel jobs expected in the Wrocław area are now off the table. Randy Potts brings us more in his latest report.
Intel is cutting its workforce by 15%. From the 96,400 it reported at the end of June. The company now plans to further reduce headcount to 75,000 by the end of the year. Intel's revenue flatlined in the second quarter of 2025, and the company expects a third quarter loss of around $13 billion. The job cuts, some of which have been completed already, are part of an effort by CEO Lip Bhutan to turn around the fortunes of the U.S. chipmaker.
There are no more blank checks. Every investment must make economic sense. We will build what our customers need, when they need it, and earn their trust through consistent execution.
Intel plans to slow new construction in Ohio while canceling all planned new construction in both Germany and Poland. In Poland, Intel was already building a semiconductor plant outside Wrocław in the city of Miankinia. That construction has now ground to a halt. Local authorities are maintaining an upbeat stance and say that thanks to the preparatory work already done, the 400-hectare construction site will be fully suitable for attracting other investors.
The territory will not remain in limbo and can be offered to other buyers. Given its uniqueness and attractiveness, I expect investor interest to be significant.
However, the 2,000 jobs expected from Intel's planned construction outside Wrocław will not be replaced at any time in the foreseeable future.
It's obviously a big loss because we very much counted on this investment as one of those investment that the country was proud of, being made in a very modern, technologically advanced sector, and generating a lot of value added and technological upgrade of the Polish economy. So it is a painful decision for us, but it seems that you can hardly blame the Polish government for an error in this area. This is rather the story about either just the company itself or the company and the U.S. government and its policies.
On top of the halted construction in Germany and Poland, Intel's new CEO also plans to consolidate chip packaging operations in Costa Rica with its other packaging operations in Vietnam and Malaysia. Since CEO Tan took the helm in March, Intel has divested businesses, laid off employees, and redirected resources, affecting the economic landscape both worldwide and here in Poland. For TVP World, this is Randy Potts.
The Kosovan parliament has yet again failed to convene, and the clock is ticking mercilessly as, according to the Constitutional Court, the parliament has until midnight on Saturday to elect a speaker. And as the biggest threat could now be a possible snap election, the stakes are high for all parties involved. More on the situation in Kosovo in Paweł Trzaskowski's report.
Trucks are spraying water onto Bill Clinton Boulevard to cool it as heatwave scorches the capital of Kosovo. And ice is in high demand in Pristina. But it's not only the streets of Kosovo that are red hot, but also the country's parliament. It still fails to form this Friday for the 52nd time since it was elected in February. Over this half-year deadlock, Kosovans grew increasingly tired of it, with not-so-subtle allegories of political stubbornness presented in front of the parliament, and heads shaven in a sign of protest.
With this symbolic act, I'm trying to show that MPs have gone too far. This is too much.
The elections that started this deadlock were won by Vetëvendosje party. But despite the lavish celebrations, Vetëvendosje, which had been governing alone in the previous term, did not secure enough votes to govern on their own again. And for half a year, it was unable to find a coalition partner. Eventually, in June, the country's constitutional court issued a 30-day ultimatum to form a government. And earlier this month, it seemed the deadlock might be resolved.
We'll do our best to achieve this in the spirit of cooperation, with intensive, constructive consultations.
But with continued failures, including the one today, and the deadline expiring at midnight on Saturday, Kosovo is now entering uncharted territory.
The court said, look, you got another 30 days to try this, or else. Now, the court did not specify what this or else might entail.
It is reported that if Saturday's last chance session fails as well, a 2-week interim period will be imposed, after which Kosovo might be faced with
early elections, because, it's not the case that not everything has been tried. I mean, there are only so many possibilities, possible coalitions that would actually get the numbers that they need.
Therefore, a cold shower in the sizzling Balkan heat might be the solution that will bring some political consensus to Kosovo. Paweł Trzaskowski for TVP World.
As I mentioned before, General Grynkewich made his way to Poland for a series of high-profile meetings, including Polish Foreign Minister Sikorski and Polish Prime Minister Tusk. At the same time, Poland signed a landmark deal with the U.S. as part of the foreign military financing program. Could this be a clear signal of a tangible threat of Russia going even further in its expansionist tendencies? Also, where does the U.S. stand on recent moves by Volodymyr Zelenskyy to influence the anti-corruption institutions in Ukraine? To discuss all this and more, Kurt Volker, former U.S. Special Representative for Ukraine negotiations, joins me now. Thank you so much, sir, for coming on the show.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So, General Grynkewich, Commander-in-Chief of the European NATO forces, met with Donald Tusk and Radosław Sikorski. As we look at this meeting, why is it significant for the security of the region, considering the general's position within NATO?
Well, first off, he's the newly appointed SACEUR, so this is now the Trump administration leaning in to support NATO and to use NATO. You just think back a few months before the NATO summit, there were a lot of questions about President Trump's commitment to NATO. But it was a very positive NATO summit. He said he's changed his view about NATO. He has put NATO now in a role of coordinating the delivery of some assistance to Ukraine, something that had never been done in the Biden administration. And President Trump has always had a favorable for Poland, which is spending a lot on defense. And he's now using the general, using NATO, using American resources to lean in to reinforce and reward Poland for its commitment on European security. So all in all, very, very positive moves.
I would like to go back to what you said just a second ago. We know that General Grynkewich was to meet the American military personnel in Poland. Considering the American involvement and considering how President Trump changed his narrative and changed his point of view on both Vladimir Putin and Russia and its recent behavior, do you think that there's any chance at any point that not only the financial support is going to be granted to Poland, but we're going to see more military personnel from the States coming over to Poland?
Well, in terms of military personnel, I'm not sure. I think the Pentagon is looking at actually trying to figure out how it can reduce the U.S. footprint in Europe generally. But that might also involve some rebalancing, where you might have more people in Poland and the Baltic states and fewer in Germany or in the West. But that is something the Pentagon is still looking at. As for military support for Ukraine and for Poland, I think that is going to continue. And it's going to be more in the equipment side and the financing side, whether through loans to Ukraine or purchases of material for Ukraine that Germany or the Netherlands or Norway can do. So in terms of American troop presence, I wouldn't want to overstate that. But the commitment to the American military capability, I think, has been reinforced now under President Trump.
General Grynkewich stated in one of his public appearances only but a few days ago that European Union countries may have more than 18 months to prepare for a possible large-scale military conflict with Russia. China may also be involved on their own front. We also heard from Prime Minister Donald Tusk, who said that after speaking to the general, he reiterated and he backed the same idea. Do you think this is a fair assessment? Or are we to be concerned, or is this just in the realm of a possibility?
I would say the latter. It's in the realm of the possible. We tend to overstate Russian military capabilities. Look at what happened when they launched their full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, and then the difficulties that Russia has had since then. It's true that Russia puts a lot of resources into its military in terms of personnel, in terms of equipment. They're ramping up defense production. And so, yes, we have to take that seriously. And we have to make sure that we are not complacent when it comes to having the right kind of defense capabilities in place. But that said, I think Russia is not nearly as capable as they want us to believe. They're having a very difficult time in Ukraine. And it would be foolhardy of Russia to try to attack NATO in the next 18 months. They simply would not have the military capability to prevail at all. And so I don't think it's likely, but it's just something we need to be prepared for just in case.
We spoke about 18 months, but given more time, do you think that Russia is going to be able to actually attack any of the NATO countries?
Yeah, I think if you stretch it out 5 to 10 years, then you could see them building up and reconstituting a more serious military capability. They've really depleted their military right now with the war in Ukraine. But if we have a ceasefire this year and then they spend the time rebuilding, then I'd say in a 5 to 10 year horizon, it's more plausible. And yes, I think that as long as Vladimir Putin is in power, his stated goal is the reconstitution of the Russian Empire. So that includes the Baltic states, Finland, part of Poland. It is a very aggressive, ambitious desire to rebuild that empire. He thinks those are all lost Russian lands that he wants to reacquire. So we have to take that threat seriously.
So Poland signed a $4 billion deal as part of the foreign military financing framework. What would you say this says about the Polish-U.S. relations, cooperation in the field of defense and military?
Yeah, it's two things. One of them, there is a great deal of respect and support for Poland because Poland is doing its own share. Poland spending 4.7% of GDP on defense, hosting American forces, serving as a major launching pad for security in Europe as a whole. Poland is doing a lot of the things that the U.S. would want other NATO countries to do as well. So there's a lot of support for Poland that way. Secondly, what you're seeing with President Trump is a reorientation of the way we use military assistance. It is not just giving things away that taxpayers are paying for, but it is trying to find ways to leverage things financially so that it is a more fair bargain. And in this case, it's a loan guarantee that the U.S. is providing, meaning that Poland is borrowing the money, Poland will pay the money back eventually, but the U.S. is providing a guarantee for that to keep the rate down. This is a win for both sides.
As I mentioned before, I would like to ask you about President Zelenskyy and his decision that was found to be controversial by many across the globe to influence the anti-corruption institutions in Ukraine. Do you think that this move is going to actually influence the relationship between the U.S. and Ukraine? We already know, and we actually showed this in one of the reports, that President Zelenskyy is trying to walk it back and he's trying to make amends when it comes to that. But is the damage done?
Well, I don't think it's permanent damage. No, I think it was a foolish decision, tone deaf in terms of what the world cares about. We already see that there is substantial corruption still in Ukraine. It's understandable, perhaps, that in wartime it's a little bit harder to control that. But to then try to centralize the anti-corruption authorities under the office of the president, that is completely the opposite of the type of reform that needs to happen, and got a very strong backlash from the U.S. and from the European Union. And as you say, he's now reversing that. I don't think it's permanent damage, but it is one more indicator for people in Washington or in Brussels that President Zelenskyy doesn't quite have a handle on how to make sure that Ukraine is succeeding in the Western European model. That is to say, a democracy, market economy, rule of law, human rights, all of the things that Ukraine is going to have to do right to be able to join the European Union. It's still not quite getting that right.
I wanted to move away slightly from the topic of Poland and Ukraine and that situation, because we had a major development. We heard that Mr. Macron recognized Palestine as a state causing an uproar. That's something we've covered here on TVP World as well. What do you think pushed President Macron to announce that this very moment? And do you think there is a chance that, for example, Prime Minister Keir Starmer or Chancellor Merz are going to follow suit?
No, I don't see Germany or UK following suit. Obviously, what Macron was responding to was the absolutely horrific pictures of Palestinians that are coming out from the deprivation, the lack of food, lack of water, constant bombardment, constant security threats, and just emaciated children, starvation, really horrific pictures that we've seen coming out of Gaza. And he was reacting to that to send a signal to Israel that he's not happy. I don't think the recognition of a Palestinian state at this stage will have any on-the-ground impact. It's not going to change anything in reality. It's just an expression of displeasure towards Israel. And as I said, I don't think it's going to be a stampede toward doing that, because it won't have a practical effect. And there are other consequences that will follow if countries were to start recognizing a Palestinian state.
Just before we go, we heard from President Trump, who said, I quote, "Here's the good news. What he says doesn't matter. His statement doesn't carry any weight." Don't you find this response to Mr. Macron's decision a little harsh, especially considering the climate?
Yeah, but it's very typical for President Trump. He just says harsh things like that because it grabs attention, makes Trump the center of attention. All publicity is good publicity as far as Trump is concerned. So, yes, it's harsh that way, but I think people are used to it.
Thank you very much, Kurt Volker, former U.S. Special Representative for Ukraine negotiations. Thank you for joining me.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And so this would be all here on World News Tonight. I'm Klaudia Czerwińska. Thank you very much for joining, and I do hope to see you soon here on TVP World for more news and features.